Welcome to my complete acrylic painting workflow. It's been a hot minute since I last made a dedicated painting process video, but today I'm spilling the beans and maybe some paint water on how I create my hand-painted masterpieces. We're diving into everything, the tools I swear by and occasionally swear at, my methods and techniques, and all the time-saving hacks I've picked up over the years of painting, experimenting, and accidentally gluing things to my desk. And by the end of this, hopefully you'll be armed with enough knowledge and confidence to create something epic of your own. Or at the very least, avoid drinking your paint water. Let's get into it. Part 1. Getting started. Okay, the first thing we need is an idea. Sometimes they strike you like a lightning bolt. Boom! Instant inspiration. But other times, they're rarer than a PSA 10 Illustrator Pikachu. And if you have one of those, firstly, you probably robbed Logan Paul. And secondly, forget painting. Freaking sell that thing and retire. But let's be real, every artist has sat there, pencil or paintbrush in hand, staring into the abyss of a blank canvas, thinking, what the heck am I gonna make? It's like the canvas is judging you, silently mocking your indecision. So let's learn some tricks to streamline the process of figuring out what to paint, or at least distract the canvas long enough to throw something at it. For the realists. Number 1, you could paint a self-portrait. You already have the model on hand, like literally, or guilt trip a family member or friend into sitting still for a few hours. How about still life? Still awesome. Raid your pantry or grab some random cool looking objects, weird vases, funky fruit, or that old, slightly menacing doll in the corner. It's all fair game. Your phone, it's a pocket-sized treasure trove. Snap your own reference photos or visit websites like pexels.com for free, high-quality, royalty-free images. I love this site. Or you can repaint works from old masters or your favorite artists. Just, don't try to pass it off as your own original unless you enjoy awkward conversations and public apologies. If you're into realism, it's pretty simple to come up with what to paint. Just freaking paint what you see. But for my fantasists and imaginators, reference photos are still pretty solid here. You can use them as raw material and twist them into your own zany style. I mean, you could freaking go wild and grab a few photos and kind of Frankenstein them together in Photoshop. You could put out like Instagram story polls and ask your fans for ideas, then smash a few together like unicorn, cat, cyborg. Sure. Angry astronaut llama. Freaking absolutely. Or you could ground your chaos in something familiar. Start with something people know and love, then make it crazy. S'mores? Make it crazy. Volkswagen van? Make it crazy. Goats? Why not? Say it with me. Make it crazy. Inspiration is everywhere. You can paint how your mind's eye imagines a moment described in your favorite novel or fairy tale or creepypasta. Shoot, you could even shake up a freaking game of Boggle and whatever words pop out, make them into art. Socks, cave, pug? Sounds like the start of a masterpiece to me. You can limit yourself. Limit your colors. Limit your time. Limit your tools. Limitations force creativity. It's like solving an art puzzle, but instead of finding an edge piece, you've got 3 crayons, a ballpoint pen, and a 2-hour timer. Now go! And then of course there's the biggest motivator of them all, clients. If someone's paying you, congratulations. Now you've got direction and motivation, aka deadlines and anxiety. Plus, the sooner you get started, the sooner you get paid, and then you can buy more coffee and art supplies. But if you're not at the client stage yet, don't sweat it. All the tricks I just talked about and a whole lot more will help you practice, build your portfolio, and just keep the creative juices flowing. The more consistently you create, the faster your skills will grow. And before long, you'll look back and wonder how you ever doubted yourself. Remember, the biggest hurdle isn't coming up with ideas, it's just getting started. So grab that brush or pencil or tablet and show that blank canvas who's boss. Part 2. Tools. Now hang on a second, before I jump into my acrylic painting tools, I gotta tell you about another tool that's incredibly useful for artists. And that's today's video sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is a website where you can build a website. They have these amazing templates where all you gotta do is drop your awesome content into their beautiful templates, and schmesto presto, you got a website. If you're a painter, an artist, a photographer, any kind of vision you wanna share with the world, you can do it with a beautiful website on Squarespace. As an artist, I love their e-commerce options where I can sell my art and my merch. They even have new Squarespace payments where they not only take credit card and PayPal, but things like Afterpay, Klarna, and a bunch of other payment options where, if you're an artist and you sell big ticket items, it might be helpful to your customer for them to be able to pay in several small chunks over time. They have member exclusive areas where you could reserve certain content for your most diehard audience, and of course their beautiful image galleries to make your website as beautiful as your paintings. I've been using Squarespace for years and years. It's the center to my whole business, and if I can build a website, you can too. Squarespace makes it easy, but if you ever do run into any issues, they have 24/7 customer support. So what are you waiting for? The time is now for you to have a beautiful website. Go to squarespace.com to start your free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/1000 for 10% off the first purchase of a website or domain. Now, where were we? Oh yeah, tools. First up, paints. I swear by Golden Fluid acrylics. These babies are like the Ferrari of acrylics. Smooth, sexy, and fast. Drying. They're ready to use straight out of the bottle, but I do like to water them down just a little bit for that perfect glide. Now, if you're on a budget, no shame in the game. Grab some Golden brand titanium white and some carbon black and keep that pinky up the whole way to the register because you're fancy now. Then mix in some budget-friendly colors like Liquitex Basics or Arteza or something like that. Get a super dark version of the cheap color you want. Then add in some of that nice golden white so that cheaper color will take on some of the attributes of the nicer paint. Think of it like adding whipped cream to instant coffee. It just feels a little more gourmet. Oh, and here's a pro tip. Check those series numbers on your golden paints. Lower numbers equals cheaper paints. For example, this titanium white is series 1. It's $35.69 for a 16-ounce bottle. But this vat orange is series 8. And it's a whopping $81.68 for the same 16 ounces. I mean, it must be called golden paint because they think they're selling liquid gold over here. Okay, my go-to colors include titanium white and carbon black, the bread and butter of any palette. Then we got Pyrrole red, vat orange, and Hansa yellow opaque. Bright, punchy, warm goodness. And I round it out with green gold, ultramarine blue, teal, turquoise phthalo, and quinacridone magenta. My fancy sounding cool colors that'll make you sound like you know what you're talking about if you can rapid fire all of their names from memory. But if you're trying to save cash but you still want to play around with this palette, skip the pricier shades like vat orange and green gold, and you really don't need teal if you already have turquoise phthalo. Honestly, you can mix up a lot of these colors on your own if you just have a nice red, a nice blue, a nice yellow, a black, and a white. This Pyrrole red right here I think is a series 7 or 8. I could totally switch that out with like a series 3 or 4 red and save a bunch of money, but oh man, Pyrrole red is just, oh, it's so good. Oh, it's so good. Yeah, I needs that. But while we're on the subject of balling on a budget and saving money, let's talk about my palette. I use the Stay Wet palette, which is basically like a little Tupperware spa for my paints. It's got a sponge and a special kind of paper that keeps my paints wet for days on end. Sure, there are DIY hacks to do the same thing with like wet paper towels and spray bottles and plastic wraps, but this thing is like 20 bucks. I've had it for 5-6 years, and it's definitely paid for itself 10 times over by saving my paint from becoming little dried clumps of regret. Then we got our mediums. Beginner artists often sleep on acrylic mediums, but they're like secret potions for your paint. You got matte medium, my ride or die. It seals, smooths, deglosses, and makes you feel like you know what you're doing. I somehow end up using this stuff on almost every project I ever do. You got gel mediums, thicken your paint for chunky texture. Pouring mediums for when you want to get messy. Glazing medium, this stuff is miraculous for adding translucent layers to your art. Crackle paste, makes your art look like it lived through the Renaissance. Fabric medium, turns any acrylic into fabric paint, because, why not? Open acrylic mediums, it slows your dry time so that you can pretend like you're an oil painter, and the list goes on and on. Mediums are like condiments, just experiment a little and find your favorite flavors. Then we got our brushes. Okay, here's the deal. Expensive brushes are nice, but cheap brushes, they get the job done, and pretty dang well. My favorite detail brushes? A 12-pack for $7.99 on Amazon. That's like 50 cents a brush. That said, you can go like 2 bargain and end up using a brush that's designed for finger painting. I'm looking for brushes that have a nice flex to them, spring back into shape nicely, not too loose, not too firm, but I think for beginners on a budget, brushes are a great way to save some money. The cheap ones are pretty good. As far as the kinds of brushes, you got your flat brushes, you want some big ones, some medium ones for bold strokes and big coverage, plus you turn them sideways and they can make nice clean lines. You got your round brushes, you probably want some small ones and some medium ones. Those are good for details. Liner brushes, having a few of these laying around makes making clean, smooth lines a dream. Filbert brushes, I don't use these quite as much, but they're a nice mix between a flat and a round. And then fan brushes, honestly, no clue. I never use these things. Bob Ross would be so disappointed in me. And then my secret weapon, a blow dryer. The best thing about acrylic painting is how fast you can work because the paint dries quick, and a blow dryer just makes that even quicker. I keep one close by at all times. I even zip tied this little hook thingy to it so I can hang it right here on my art table. This thing is never more than an arm's length away. There's about a bajillion other art supplies and tools you can use, but these are my go-to. And remember, your tools don't have to be fancy, just functional. Whether you're rocking golden paints or a starter kit from your local craft store, the magic is in how you use them. Part 3. Prep work. Alright, now it's time for a sketch. I use an iPad Pro and sketch in Procreate, which costs about $10 or maybe $13 now because inflation is out here making even apps feel fancy. Sometimes I use Adobe Fresco, which is now totally free, so that's kind of like reverse inflation or something. Digital sketching is fantastic because it lets me move things around, erase mistakes, stretch elements, and give each little thing a nice little layer of their own that they can call home. So cozy. But listen, you don't need an iPad to sketch like a boss. Use what you've got. A pencil and paper are still undefeated champs. But hey, just start where you're comfortable. Again, emphasis on start. Listen guys, in my early days, I would sketch directly onto the canvas. Bold, right? Well, 9 times out of 10, I'd mess up something that just really needed changing. And let me tell you, erasing on canvas is like trying to unburn toast. It's possible, I guess, but it is not pretty. Save yourself the agony and sketch on something separate first. Speaking of canvas, let's pick one. And I'm speaking figuratively when I say canvas because, spoiler alert, I prefer working on wood panels. Why? Let me count the ways. Number 1, smooth as butter. The ultra smooth surface makes my brushes glide like the Jamaican bobsled team. Number 2, durable AF. Wood panels can handle pressure. You can lean on them, poke them, even ship them without cringing at the thought of damage. You try that with the canvas and you'll have a hole the size of your regret. Number 3, you don't necessarily have to frame them. I think a wood panel just looks nice. You can throw a frame on them or you can just leave them as this cool wood panel that looks awesome on a wall, I think, in my personal taste. Okay, my panel is picked out and now it's time for gesso, the unsung hero. Think of gesso as your panel's hype man. It primes the surface. It seals the wood. It adds that fine tooth that the paint just loves to stick to. Seriously, gesso and paint are like peanut butter and jelly, like mashed potatoes and gravy, like pineapple and pizza. Don't you dare say gross. It's the best. I don't want to hear nothing about it in the comments. You shut your mouth. Right now! Here's the deal. I usually cheat by buying pre-gessoed panels, like these ones from Ampersand or these ones from Blick Premier. Why? Because sanding and layering gesso is messy, time-consuming, and frankly, I'd rather spend that time painting. But if you're buying bargain canvases, watch out. Be warned. They might claim to be pre-gessoed, but chances are they need another coat or two. Anyway, if you're DIYing your gesso, water it down to the consistency of somewhere between eggnog and Go-Gurt. But don't drink it. Use a nice big brush to put the gesso on. We want to be painting, right? Not doing all this prep work. Apply thin coats and sand between layers to avoid a surface so rough and rippled it looks like Marco's kitchen sink. I use a blow dryer to speed up the dry time on my gesso. I've always kind of wondered if someone like Bumgardner Restoration saw me doing this. Would they tell me it's a bad idea to blow dry my gesso? I don't know, but I do it. I live on the wild side. And then someone in my comments on one of my videos told me to gesso the front and the back of the artwork to seal the wood on both sides and give even moisture and temperature protection. I don't know if that's actually true, but it just makes sense in my head, and I've been doing that ever since. Transferring the sketch. Okay, so we have our sketch and we have our panel picked out and gessoed. Now it's time to get our sketch onto the panel. For this step, I like to use transfer paper. You can also use a projector, but I think it's easier to just use transfer paper versus setting up the projector, finding the correct HDMI adapters, getting the panel mounted vertically, then spending time getting the correct distance and the correct focus and skewing the image just so perfectly that it's square with your panel and not rotated. I just lay down this roll transfer paper with the graphite side down. Don't forget that, and tape it into place. And I print out my concept sketch on my home printer. If it's too big to fit on one sheet of paper, I open it up in Adobe Acrobat, hit print, and then hit this poster button, which splits the art across multiple sheets of paper. And then I tape those together. I put my sketch on top of the transfer paper and tape it down so it doesn't slip while I'm tracing. Then I take a colored ballpoint pen and trace over my whole sketch. The pressure from the pen presses through the paper and imprints the graphite onto the panel. I use a colored ballpoint pen so that I can easily see where I've already traced and make sure I didn't miss any spots. You can also make your own transfer paper by rubbing graphite all over a piece of paper. I've never done this before, so I can't say how well it works or not. I really don't mind spending the extra money on the Pro transfer paper because it works really well. And you can use the same sheet of transfer paper for like 3, 4, 5 transfers. And then we lift our transfer paper and voila! Our sketch is on the panel, like magic. Toning the panel. Okay, next we're gonna tone our panel, aka hit it with a wash of watered down acrylic paint. I like to tone my panels for the following reasons. 1, it seals your graphite sketch so you're not smudging your line art as you paint. 2, painting on top of a bright white canvas can deceive your eyes and trick you into thinking your colors are darker than they actually are. Number 3, white is harder to fully cover than a more neutral tone. If your paint is kind of thin in certain areas, tiny bits of white might show through in your finished artwork. Number 4, if you're using thin layers, it can add a very subtle color tone to your painting that I find quite pleasing. Number 5, if you're filming your art process, the pure white makes it harder to set exposure. Maybe your artwork is nicely exposed, but then the white is super blown out. I think a toned panel is just easier to film in general. And then a quick side note, you might want to spray your pencil marks with some fixative first before you tone your panel. I personally never do this, but if you use bargain transfer paper or you made your own transfer paper, the watered down acrylics may wash away your pencil marks while you're toning. This has never happened to me, but I have this online painting class, and some of my students over there left comments saying this happened to them. And then finally, our last step is to prep the work by hitting the whole panel with a layer of matte medium. This step is not mandatory, you could skip it, but I like to do this. It takes away some of the gloss from the acrylic wash, plus art supplies like graphite pencils and white charcoal pencils do really well on matte medium. So if you have some new ideas or some edits to the sketch that you want to make with pencils or whatever later, the matte medium is just a dream for that. Plus the paint goes on there really nice. So if I remember to do it, I'll hit it with a layer of matte medium before I start the real painting. All right, and we are prepped. All this prep work might feel tedious when all you want to do is paint already, but trust me, pro artists know that the magic happens when you build a solid foundation. You'll thank yourself later when your finished piece looks stunning and stands the test of time. Part 4, painting. Okay. You're sitting there. You're staring down at your beautiful toned panel. You're ready. It's go time. But first, I want you to do something for me. Lean over. Yeah, keep going. Lean a little further. Yep, like that. Okay, now what do you see? That's right. The sides. We're gonna start with the sides. With the structure of these wood panels, you kind of have the option to frame them or not. So the sides might show. So let's get them sides looking pretty. I usually just paint them a solid color. A lot of times just a nice deep navy blue, something that whispers, I'm here, but I'm chill. I do this step first because your brush has a tendency to kind of wrap up over that edge and hit the top of your canvas. That's no big deal if you do this step first because you can just paint over it later. But if you save this step for the very last, you gotta be way more careful not to get paint up on your completed painting. So do this first and thank me later. All right, top of the painting, backgrounds, baby. Start with the stuff that's furthest away. We're working back to front. It's like building a sandwich and the background is your bread. You don't lay peanut butter down before your bread, you savage. Who are you? How could you do such a thing? Well, the same logic applies here. By working back to front, you can overlap layers. Doing it the other way around takes some serious precision. So the back to front method is totally beginner friendly. But keep in mind the background elements should look hazy and muted because, you know, Perspective. Take a look at this photo. When you look at the mountain and the trees in the background, you can see that it's much more hazy back there and much more saturated and dark up here. Think light, unsaturated colors for the faraway stuff. Mix in whites and blacks to your paint to kind of tone them down, and save those bold, punchy colors for the foreground where the action happens. As you're painting and you're switching from color to color and brush to brush, make sure you're washing those brushes out really good. I use this 3-tub water system. I use the big section to get the paint off, then use the next cup to swirl it around some more for a rinse, and then by the time it hits the 3rd cup, the water should stay pretty clean. Plus, since you're using this big paint tub and not a cup, there's no chance of you drinking your paint water. Remember way back in the intro when I said I was gonna teach you to not drink your paint water? See, I wasn't lying. Also, try to keep paint off the ferrule. Ferrule? Ferrule, however you say it. It's that metal bit that connects the bristles to the handle. Once paint gets all gunked up and dried in there, your brush will totally lose its shape and is basically trash. Okay, and now you can see I'm over here painting on the right side of my painting, and I am right-handed, so now there's no place to rest my hand for stability. Solution? Grab another panel, a thick book, or even a Renaissance-inspired maul stick, which is basically a stick for resting your hand on, and give yourself the support you need. For my lefties out there, the same thing goes, just on the other side. Now, when it comes to painting, thin layers are win layers. When I first started out as an artist, I just wanted the most thick, opaque, single coat coverage paint I could get my hands on. But now that I've developed more as an artist, I appreciate that some of my paints are more transparent. It means I can work in thin, smooth layers and use some of that transparency to my advantage to use layers to create depth and shading. I take this even further with washes and glazes. I'll mix in some acrylic glazing liquid or even just a little bit more water with some dark, cool paint and glaze in some cool shadows over sections that have already been fully rendered. It instantly adds even more depth, and the shift to cooler colored purple and blue shadows adds a lot of dynamics to the lighting of the painting. So remember when I said we work back to front, we also work dark to light. I start with my shadows first, then my midtones, then the highlights. And when I'm working from dark to light, I don't just add white to my colors. That's amateur hour. I give it the old shift and lift. Mix in yellows to shift the hue, while simultaneously mixing in whites to lift the value. For example, if I'm painting something green, I'll start with a cool tealish dark green. And as I work from the shadows to the midtones to the highlights, I'll continue lifting the value with white, but mixing in yellows to shift the hue all the way to like a warm lime green or chartreuse for my highlights. This transition from cool to warm adds some drama and some major vibes. I sometimes use wet to wet painting, which is like blending 2 wet colors together on the canvas, but a lot of times I feel like I'm just kind of getting lucky when that works out perfectly. There's a lot of chances for happy accidents, but also a lot of chances for strange outcomes when you're doing wet to wet mixing. So I don't use that method a ton, but it does come in handy sometimes. We've been talking a lot about shadows and highlights, but try really leaning into those highlights. I think some strategically placed, super bright highlights can be really eye-catching and add some nice depth and realism to your art. I see some beginner work from artists who haven't pushed their shadows and highlights far enough apart from each other, and the work looks flat. Sometimes acrylic paint will also dry darker than it looks when it's wet, so keep mixing in that white and that yellow into your colors a few more steps and see if some strategically placed shines don't add a little bit of something to your piece. A lot of painting is just trying to get a deeper understanding of light and trying to reproduce how light behaves on your canvas. And let's talk about how you should look at your art. It's time to hack your perspective. Step away from your painting. No, really, step back, like 10 feet. What do you see now? Or better yet, take a photo and look at it on your tiny little phone. Issues that were hiding in plain sight will suddenly scream, "Fix me!" When we focus on a large painting, our eye can really only focus on a small point in space, and everything else kind of like blurs out around that. But when we shrink our painting down to the size of a phone screen, it's easier to see the painting as a whole and notice issues we might not have seen when working on it close up. Rotate your painting, view it in a mirror, flip it digitally. These new perspectives will have mistakes leaping out at you like, damn, how did I miss that the whole time? And once you've painted everything you need to paint and it's all said and done, step back and bask in your glorious creation. Maybe even give yourself a high five. And if you're anything like me, you'll admire it for all of 5 minutes before muttering, I could do better. But hey, that's the artist's journey. always improving, one piece at a time. But wait, you're not quite done yet. Part 5. Finishing. There's a couple things we gotta tackle before we finish our painting. We're trying to be professional after all, aren't we? So that's right, let's varnish this thing. But wait, before we dive into varnishing like maniacs, we need to talk about isolation coats. I know, it sounds like something you'd wear during a pandemic, but it's actually a lifesaver for your art. An isolation coat is the unsung hero of painting preservation, a clear layer that sits between your art and your varnish. Why? Because varnish has a bad habit of yellowing over time. The isolation coat lets you strip off the old varnish and refresh it without turning your painting into a restoration horror story. There's this product by Golden called, very original name, Isolation Coat. It's great for the job. But if you're feeling a little bit rebellious, you can also use soft gel gloss. Either way, once you've laid down this magical barrier, it's varnish time. So varnish, glossy, matte, or satin. It's like choosing your Starbucks order. It's personal. I used to swear by the Golden Satin water-based varnish. Rest in peace to that discontinued beauty. But lately I've been kind of digging gloss for the way it makes the colors pop. The only downside? Photographing is a nightmare. So maybe take your sexy art photos before you add the varnish. Or the isolation coat for that matter, because that stuff is glossy too. Here's a pro tip, just test varnishes on a separate surface before committing. So once you've picked your favorite, just water it down slightly and grab a big soft brush. Apply one coat brushing in one direction, let it dry, then go in the other direction for coat number 2. Boom, smooth and even coverage. Now the next step, I know from personal experience, a lot of artists skip. This separates the pros from the lazy bastards. Listen, I used to run a gallery and we had a new art show every single month. And it used to kill me that so many artists didn't give one single ounce of thought to the back of their painting. They had no hanging hardware of any kind on their art. Like, you poured your heart and soul into this work, you put it up for sale with a big old fancy price tag on it, but you care so little about your customer that you don't even give them a convenient way to put this painting securely on their wall? Come on, people. Do better. Okay, rant over. Here's the deal, just grab some of these little D-rings and screw them into the back of your wood panel. Stretch a wire between the 2 rings, give it a little twisty, and voila! In under 3 minutes, you've got hanging hardware that's easy for anyone to use. Bonus points if you stick these little rubber bumper pads on the back, and now your painting won't scratch the wall or lean like a sad house plant. But wait, there's more! For that extra I'm a professional and I care touch, handwrite the title on the back, cause 10 years from now, you'll thank past you for saving future you from the agony of trying to remember what you called this painting. I also like to sign the back too one more time just for that little extra pizzazz. And just like that, we're done. Taking 10 extra minutes to finish the back properly not only makes you look like a pro, but shows collectors you care about their experience. After all, they're trusting you with their walls. So make it count. And there you have it. That's a whole bunch of stuff that I know about acrylic painting. Why do I feel like I've only scratched the surface? Probably because of decades I've spent sitting in front of canvases, having the time of my life one paint stroke at a time. There's just no way I could explain all those experiences in one video. Once you're in there, actually doing it, you'll find there's a whole infinite world of paint to explore. So honestly, if there's one thing you take away from this video, I hope it's simply this. Just do it. Wait, that sounds familiar. Is that like somebody else's slogan? It kind of has a ring to it. No, but seriously, just paint, have fun, make mistakes, experiment, and most importantly, subscribe to my YouTube channel. Okay, bye.